It's funny how some things just stick around, isn't it? I was cleaning out the hall closet the other day. It's one of those jobs I put off forever, especially on rainy afternoons like that one. The sky was all gray and heavy outside, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside with a cup of tea. And there, tucked in the back behind some old umbrellas and a box of Christmas lights we haven't used in years, I found it again. This little wooden box. Nothing fancy, just plain oak with a latch that's a bit rusty now. Inside, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, was his old pocket watch, the one with the chain that's starting to tarnish at the edges. I sat down right there on the floor, the carpet feeling a little dusty under me, and just held it for a while. Why couldn't I throw it away? It's not like it works anymore. The hands stopped years ago. But every time I think about getting rid of it, something pulls me back. I remember the first time I saw that watch. It was back when we were young. Oh, must have been the early 70s. I was working at the library downtown, shelving books in the afternoons after my classes at the community college. He came in one day, looking for a book on fixing cars, said his old Chevy was giving him trouble again. His name was Tom, and he had this quiet way about him, not pushy like some of the guys I'd met. He wore that watch on a chain looped through his belt, and it caught the light from the window as he leaned on the counter, asking if we had anything on carburetors. I laughed a little, told him I'd check the card catalog. We ended up talking for half an hour, me forgetting about the stack of returns I was supposed to handle. He wasn't flashy, Tom, just steady, with calloused hands from his job at the mill and a smile that crinkled his eyes. We started seeing each other after that. Simple dates at first, a walk in the park where the leaves were turning red and gold that fall, or grabbing coffee at the diner on Main Street, the one with the squeaky booths and the jukebox that always played too loud. He'd check that watch every now and then, not because he was in a hurry, but like it was a habit, something to fiddle with when he was thinking. My dad gave it to me, he told me once, over pie and ice cream. Said it was for keeping time, but really it's for remembering where you've been. His dad had passed when Tom was just a kid, hit by a truck on his way home from work. Tom didn't talk about it much, but I could see it in the way he held on to things, like that watch. It wasn't valuable or anything, just a simple silver case with Roman numerals that were wearing thin. But it meant something to him, a piece of his past he carried around. We got married a couple years later, in a little church with creaky pews and flowers from my aunt's garden. It was June, hot and sticky, the kind of day where the air hums with cicadas. I wore a dress my mom sewed, nothing extravagant, and Tom had on his best suit, the watch tucked in his pocket. We moved into a small house on Elm Street, the one with the porch that sagged a bit on one side. Life settled in, you know? Mornings with coffee percolating on the stove, the smell filling the kitchen while I packed his lunch, usually a ham sandwich and an apple wrapped in wax paper. He'd wind that watch every night before bed, sitting on the edge of the mattress in his undershirt, the chain dangling between his fingers. It was part of our routine, like brushing teeth or turning off the lights. We had 2 kids eventually, Sarah first, then little Mike a few years later. Busy times with diapers and school plays and scraped knees. Tom would come home tired from the mill, dust in his hair, but he'd always make time to read them a story, checking the watch to see if it was past bedtime. Things were good for a long while. Not perfect. Money was tight sometimes, especially when the mill laid off folks in the 80s. We argued now and then, like over whether to fix the roof or buy a new fridge first, but we always came back to each other. I'd see him out in the garage, tinkering with something, the watch on the workbench beside him. He'd lose track of time out there, forgetting dinner until I called him in. Just 1 more minute, he'd say, but it was never just one. I think that's when I started noticing how much that watch was like him, reliable, but a little worn around the edges. He didn't talk much about his feelings, Tom, kept things inside, like most men from his generation, but I'd catch him staring at it sometimes, especially on his dad's birthday or around the holidays. Wonder what he'd think of all this, he'd mutter, and I'd squeeze his hand, not saying anything because what was there to say? It started small, the changes. Around when he turned 60, I guess. He'd forget where he put his keys or mix up the days for doctor's appointments. At first, we laughed it off. "Getting old, Ellie," he'd say with a wink, calling me by that nickname only he used. But then it got worse. He'd stand in the kitchen, staring at the fridge like he couldn't remember why he opened it. The doctor said it was Alzheimer's, early stages. That word hit like a quiet storm, you know? Not loud and crashing, but seeping in slow, changing everything bit by bit. We tried to keep things normal. I'd remind him about his pills, the little orange bottles lined up on the counter next to the coffee maker. Mornings became this ritual. Me handing him his cup, black with 2 sugars, and watching him wind the watch, even though his hands shook a little now. But as the months went on, he started wandering. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard, just standing there in the rain, his shirt soaked through. Looking for something, he said, but he couldn't say what. I brought him inside, dried him off with the towel from the laundry basket that was still warm from the dryer. That night, he gave me the watch. We were sitting on the couch, the TV murmuring some old western in the background, the lamp casting shadows on the walls. "Here," he said, pressing it into my palm. "You keep it now. I might lose it." His voice was soft, like he knew what was coming. I wanted to say no, tell him he'd be fine, but I just nodded, feeling the cool metal against my skin. Why did that moment stick with me? Maybe because it felt like he was letting go of something important, a piece of himself. The emotional tug started pulling harder after that. I'd see the watch on my dresser and think about how he used to be, strong, dependable. Now he needed help with buttons on his shirt or remembering our kids' names on bad days. Sarah and Mike came over more, helping with meals. Spaghetti on Tuesdays, because that was always his favorite, with the sauce simmering all afternoon, filling the house with garlic and tomatoes. But there were days when he'd look at me like a stranger, and that hurt deep, like a bruise you can't see. I'd go into the bedroom, hold that watch, and whisper to myself, "This isn't him, not really." Regret crept in too. Why didn't we travel more when we could? We always talked about seeing the Grand Canyon, but life got in the way with bills and kids' soccer games. Now it was too late. I'd sit there, turning the watch over in my hands, feeling the engraving on the back that said, "To Tom from Dad, 1952. It was like holding on to a thread connecting us all. One evening stands out, clear as anything. It was fall again, leaves crunching underfoot outside, the air crisp with that wood smoke smell from neighbors' chimneys. Tom had a good day, remembered my birthday, even hummed an old tune while we ate soup at the kitchen table, the steam rising in little curls. After dinner, he asked about the watch. "Where's my dad's?" he said, patting his pocket like it should be there. I fetched it from the box in the closet, and his face lit up, just for a moment. He held it close, listening like it might tick again. "Keeps good time," he murmured. We sat on the porch swing, the chains creaking softly as we rocked, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The sky turned pink and orange, and for that hour it felt like old times. No confusion, just us. But as darkness fell, he handed it back. "You hang on to it, Ellie, for when I'm not here." I didn't argue, but inside it twisted something in me. Was he saying goodbye already? That was the first real turning point, I think, the realization that we were losing him piece by piece, and there was nothing to do but hold on. Things sped up after that winter. The snow came early that year, blanketing the yard in white, muffling the sounds of cars on the street. Tom got pneumonia and the hospital stays started. Beeping machines, sterile smells, nurses in scrubs rushing by. I'd sit by his bed, holding his hand, the watch in my pocket like a talisman. "Remember when we met?" I'd say, trying to pull him back. Sometimes he'd smile, nod. Other times, nothing. The kids took turns visiting, Sarah bringing photos of the grandkids, Mike fixing things around the house to keep busy. But we all knew. One morning in March, with the first robins chirping outside the window, he slipped away. Quiet, no big scene, just gone.
I was there, stroking his hair, whispering that it was okay. The room felt empty after, even with the doctor coming in, papers to sign.
Coming home was the hardest. The house echoed, his chair by the window still indented from where he sat. I went through his things slowly, over weeks. Clothes to donate, tools in the garage that Mike wanted. But the watch? I put it in that wooden box, shoved it to the back of the closet, tried not to think about it. But every so often, I'd pull it out, wind it up even though it didn't run. Why? It reminded me of the good, but also the ache, regret for the words unsaid, the trips untaken. I'd think if only we'd had more time. That was another turning point, facing the grief head on, not pushing it away. Friends said to move on, join a book club or something. I tried, but it felt forced, like putting on a coat that didn't fit. Then, about a year later, I decided to clean out the closet for real. Spring cleaning, with birds singing and the windows open to let in the breeze. I took the box down, opened it, and there was the watch. I held it, feeling its weight, and something shifted. Not dramatic, just a quiet click inside. I realized it wasn't just about holding on to Tom. It was about what he'd taught me, to keep going even when time slips away. I thought about his dad giving it to him and him giving it to me. A chain, you know? Not the metal one, but the kind that links people. I put it back, but not hidden. Now it sits on the dresser, where I see it every morning when I make the bed, smoothing the faded blue-flowered quilt. Life goes on in its way. The grandkids come over, filling the house with laughter and sticky fingerprints on the fridge. Sarah's got her own family now. Mike calls every Sunday. I take walks in the park, same one where Tom and I used to go, watching the leaves change again. And that watch, it's still there, not ticking, but reminding me. Time doesn't stop, but memories do, if you let them. I guess the gentle truth is we hold on to things not because we can't let go, but because they help us remember how to keep living. It's okay to have that ache. It's part of what makes us whole. You know, sometimes the smallest things can pull you right back into the past, don't they? I was going through that old hall closet again last week. It was one of those drizzly mornings where the rain patters softly on the roof and the light coming through the window is all muted and gray. I'd put off cleaning it for months, maybe even a year, because who wants to dig through dusty boxes when you could be sitting with a warm mug of chamomile tea instead? But there I was on my hands and knees, pushing aside a tangle of old scarves and a forgotten umbrella with a broken handle. And way in the back, behind a stack of photo albums that haven't seen the light of day in ages, I spotted that little wooden box. It's nothing special, really, just plain oak, about the size of a shoebox with a latch that's gotten stiff and rusty over the years. I pulled it out, wiped off the thin layer of dust with the hem of my sweater, and sat back on my heels right there on the faded blue carpet. Inside, nestled in an old cotton handkerchief that's yellowed a bit around the edges, was his pocket watch. The chain is starting to show spots of tarnish, and the glass face has a tiny scratch from who knows when. It doesn't even work anymore. The hands froze at 3:47 one day, and no amount of winding brings it back. I've thought about tossing it out a dozen times, especially when I'm in one of those moods where I want to clear out the clutter and start fresh. But every single time, I hesitate, feel this little tug in my chest, and put it right back. Why? That's what I've been asking myself lately. It's just a thing after all, but maybe it's more than that. I can still picture the day I first noticed that watch, like it was yesterday, even though it's been over 50 years now. It was back in 1972, I think. Yes, that sounds right, because Nixon was in the news everywhere and gas prices were starting to creep up. I was 23, working part-time at the public library in our small town, the one with the creaky wooden floors and that musty smell of old books that I secretly loved. My shifts were in the afternoons, after my morning classes at the community college where I was studying to be a teacher. I'd shelve returns, help folks find what they needed, and try not to daydream too much about getting out of that routine someday. He walked in one Tuesday. Tom, that was his name, looking a bit out of place in his work boots and flannel shirt, like he'd come straight from the lumber mill on the edge of town. He had this bookish request, though, something on auto repair, because his old Chevy pickup was acting up again, sputtering and coughing like it had a cold. I remember him leaning on the counter, his elbows resting on the worn oak surface, and that's when the watch caught my eye. It was dangling from a chain looped through his belt loop, swinging gently as he shifted his weight. The sunlight from the big window behind me glinted off the silver case, making it shine just a little. "Got anything on carburetors?" he asked, his voice low and steady, not rushed. I smiled, pushed my glasses up my nose, they were those big round frames that were in style back then, and said I'd check the card catalog. We ended up chatting while I flipped through the drawers, him telling me about how the truck had stranded him on the highway the week before, and me laughing because I'd had a similar mishap with my bicycle once. That conversation stretched on longer than it should have. I forgot about the pile of books waiting to be stamped, and he didn't seem in a hurry either. Tom wasn't the type to fill the air with nonsense. He spoke when he had something to say and listened the rest of the time. His hands were rough from the mill work, calluses from handling saws and heavy lumber, but he had this gentle way about him. Before he left with a couple of manuals under his arm, he glanced at the watch like it was reminding him of the time. "Better get back before the boss notices," he said with a grin that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. I watched him go, the doorbell jingling behind him, and thought that was that. But a few days later, he came back, saying he needed another book, though I suspected it was an excuse. We talked more about the town, the upcoming fair with its Ferris wheel and cotton candy stands, and how the river swelled every spring after the snowmelt. It turned out we both liked fishing, though I hadn't been since I was a kid with my dad. That's how it started, slow and easy, like a river finding its way. Our first real date was nothing fancy, just a walk in the park down by the lake. It was early fall, the leaves on the maples turning that fiery red and orange, crunching under our shoes as we strolled along the gravel path. The air had that crisp bite to it, and I remember pulling my cardigan tighter around me. Tom had packed a thermos of coffee, black and strong, the way he liked it, and we sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching ducks paddle around. He'd check the watch every so often, not because we had anywhere to be, but it was like a tick, something familiar. "My old man gave it to me," he explained when I asked about it, his voice dropping a notch. "Right before he passed. Said it was for keeping track of time, but I think he meant more than that, like remembering the moments that matter." His dad had died young, in a logging accident when Tom was just 12. A tree fell wrong, they said, one of those freak things that changes everything in an instant. Tom didn't dwell on it, he wasn't one for pouring out his heart, but I could see the shadow of it in his eyes, the way he held on to little things like that watch. It wasn't some heirloom worth a fortune, just a simple piece with Roman numerals etched on the face, the kind you could buy at any department store back then. But to him, it was a link to his father, a reminder in his pocket every day. We saw each other more after that. Dates at the diner on Main Street where the booths were vinyl and sticky from spilled syrup, and the waitress knew everyone by name. We'd order burgers and fries, or sometimes just pie, apple with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top, and talk about our dreams. I wanted to teach elementary school, shape young minds like my favorite teacher had done for me. Tom talked about maybe owning his own garage someday, fixing cars instead of cutting wood. Life felt full of possibility then, even if money was tight. He'd drive me home in that Chevy, the engine rumbling steadily now that he'd fixed it, and we'd park outside my parents' house, the porch light flickering because the bulb needed changing. One night, under a sky full of stars, no city lights to drown them out back then, he kissed me, soft and tentative, like he was afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. From then on, it was us against the world, or at least against the small hurdles of everyday life. We got married in the summer of '74 in the little white church on the hill where my family had gone for generations. It was a hot day, the kind where the air shimmers and you can hear cicadas buzzing in the trees.
My dress was simple, ivory lace that my mom had sewn by hand, with buttons down the back that took forever to fasten. Tom looked handsome in his suit, borrowed from his brother, the watch safely tucked in his vest pocket. We didn't have a big wedding, just family and a few friends, with punch and sandwiches in the church basement afterward. The tables were covered in paper cloths, and my aunt brought flowers from her garden, daisies and roses that wilted a bit in the heat. We danced to a record player someone set up, slow songs like Unchained Melody, and I remember resting my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. That night, we drove to a cabin by the lake for our honeymoon. Nothing extravagant, just a week of fishing and swimming, with mosquitoes buzzing around the screen door. Life settled into a rhythm after that. We rented a small house on Elm Street, the one with the sagging front porch and a backyard big enough for a garden. Mornings, I'd wake to the smell of coffee brewing on the stove, the percolator bubbling away while I sliced bread for toast. Tom would sit at the kitchen table, newspapers spread out, winding that watch with careful twists. It was part of his routine, like putting on his boots or packing his lunch pail with a thermos and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. He'd head off to the mill, the truck kicking up gravel as he left, and I'd go to my teaching job at the elementary school, herding kids through reading lessons and recess. Evenings were quiet. Dinner on the cable by 6, maybe meatloaf with mashed potatoes, the steam rising as I dished it out. We'd talk about our days, the radio playing softly in the background, static crackling now and then. On weekends, we'd fix up the house, painting the walls a soft yellow, planting tomatoes in the back that grew fat and red by July.
The kids came along a few years later. Sarah first, in 78, with her tuft of dark hair and Tom's eyes. Then Mike, in 82, a chubby baby who cried through the nights until we figured out he liked being rocked in the old wooden chair my grandma gave us. Those were busy years, diapers piling up in the laundry basket, toys scattered on the living room rug, which was threadbare from all the foot traffic. Tom was a good dad, patient even after long shifts. He'd come home smelling of sawdust, wash up at the sink with that yellow bar soap, and then scoop up the kids for a story before bed. "Once upon a time," he'd start, his voice rumbling low while they clutched their stuffed animals. He'd glance at the watch to check if it was past 8, but often let it slide if they begged for one more page. Summers, we'd pack picnics, peanut butter sandwiches, apples from the tree out back, and head to the park, spreading a blanket under the oaks. The kids would run around, collecting sticks or chasing butterflies, while Tom and I sat watching, our hands intertwined. But life isn't all smooth sailing, is it? There were rough patches. The mill hit hard times in the mid-80s. Layoffs, shorter hours, and money got tight. We'd argue sometimes, quiet ones in the kitchen after the kids were asleep, about whether to pay the electric bill or fix the leaky roof first. "We'll figure it out," Tom would say, rubbing his temples, the watch lying on the table beside him like a silent witness. I worried about him then. He carried too much on his shoulders, didn't like asking for help. But we made it through, scraping by with odd jobs. I tutored kids after school, he fixed cars for neighbors in our garage on weekends. The tools clanging out there, the radio tuned to baseball games, became a familiar sound. I'd bring him lemonade on hot days, condensation dripping down the glass, and we'd sit on the steps, talking about maybe taking a trip someday when things eased up. The Grand Canyon or the ocean, we'd never seen either. But with kids' shoes to buy and braces for Sarah's teeth, it always got pushed back. As the years rolled on, the watch became more than just an object. It was like a symbol of Tom's steadiness. He'd wind it every night before bed, sitting on the edge of the mattress in his faded pajamas, the chain coiled in his palm. I'd watch from my side, the lamp glowing softly on the nightstand cluttered with books and a half-empty water glass. "Still keeping time?" I'd tease, and he'd nod, like clockwork. But time has a way of wearing things down. When Tom hit his 50s, he started slowing a bit. Aches in his knees from years at the mill,
glasses for reading the fine print. We retired the Chevy for a newer sedan, one with air conditioning that actually worked. The kids grew up, moved out, Sarah to college, then a job in the city, Mike to trade school, following in his dad's footsteps with mechanics. The house felt bigger, quieter, with just the two of us rattling around. We'd take drives on Sundays, out to the countryside where fields stretched golden in the sun, stopping for ice cream at that roadside stand with the red awning. Then the changes started creeping in, so subtle at first I almost missed them. It was around when Tom turned 62, I think. Yes, because that was the year we celebrated with a backyard barbecue, burgers sizzling on the grill and grandkids running around with water guns. He'd forget little things, where he left his wallet or what day the trash went out. We'd chuckle about it. "Senior moments, Ellie," he'd say, using that old nickname that always made me smile. But then it escalated. One morning, he stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He trailed off, and I stepped in, showing him the buttons as if it was no big deal. The doctor appointments followed. Blood tests, scans, the waiting room with its outdated magazines and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The diagnosis came on a chilly autumn day, leaves swirling outside the office window. Early onset Alzheimer's. That word hung in the air like fog, thick and disorienting. "We'll manage," the doctor said, prescribing pills in those orange bottles that soon lined our counter like sentinels.
At first, we tried to keep our routines intact. Mornings still started with coffee, though I'd measure the grounds now and remind him about his vitamins. The watch winding became hit or miss. Sometimes he'd do it automatically, other times I'd gently place it in his hands. "Like this, remember?" I'd say, my voice steady even as my heart twisted. He'd nod, concentrate, the mechanism clicking softly. But the confusion grew. He'd ask about the kids as if they were still small, or wander into the living room mid-conversation, forgetting what we were talking about. I started locking the doors more carefully after he went for a walk one evening and ended up 2 blocks away, unsure how to get home. The neighbors found him, brought him back with kind words, but it shook me. That night, as rain tapped against the window panes, I sat up in bed, listening to his even breathing, and felt this deep ache. Why him? Why now, when we'd finally have time for those trips we'd dreamed about? The emotional weight built slowly, like snow piling up overnight. I'd find myself hesitating over simple decisions. Should I tell him again that Sarah's married now, or let it slide? Regrets bubbled up too. All those years we put off vacations thinking there'd be tomorrow. Now, tomorrow was uncertain. Inner thoughts swirled as I went about my days. Grocery shopping, pushing the cart down aisles lined with canned goods and fluorescent-lit produce, wondering if he'd remember the taste of his favorite strawberry jam. Friends called, offering sympathy, but it felt distant, like they couldn't grasp the quiet erosion happening at home. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the bedroom, the dryer still humming downstairs, when Tom came in, patting his pockets frantically. "My watch," he said, his brow furrowed. "Dad's watch, where is it?" I fetched it from the dresser drawer where I'd started keeping it safe and handed it over. He held it close, like a lifeline, his fingers tracing the case. "Don't lose it," he murmured, more to himself than me. That moment lingered, a small turning point where I realized he was slipping further and I had to hold on tighter for both of us. We adapted as best we could. Sarah and Mike visited more, bringing meals, lasagna in foil pans, salads with fresh tomatoes from the market. Tuesdays became spaghetti night, the sauce simmering all afternoon, garlic wafting through the house like a comforting blanket. But there were bad days, when he'd look at me with blank eyes, asking who I was. "It's me, Ellie," I'd say, forcing a smile, while inside something cracked a little more. I'd retreat to the bathroom, splash water on my face from the sink with its dripping faucet, and stare in the mirror at the lines around my eyes. Reflection hit hard then. Had I appreciated the good times enough?
the laughter over burnt dinners, the quiet evenings on the porch swing creaking back and forth. I'd pull out the watch, wind it myself, listening to the faint clicks, and think about Tom's dad, gone too soon. Maybe this was life's way, passing the torch, or in this case, the timepiece. One evening stands out vividly, a quiet pivot in the midst of it all. It was late fall, the air sharp with the scent of burning leaves from somewhere down the street. Tom had a lucid day, rare by then. He remembered my name without prompting, even hummed an old Elvis tune while I made soup, carrots and onions chopping on the wooden board. We ate at the table, spoons clinking against bowls, the steam warming our faces. After, he asked for the watch again. "Let me see it," he said, and I placed it in his palm. He turned it over, squinting at the engraving on the back. "To Tom, from Dad, 1952. A smile crossed his face, faint but real. We moved to the porch, bundling in blankets against the chill, the swing groaning under our weight. The sky was a wash of colors, pink bleeding into purple as the sun set behind the bare trees. For that hour, time seemed to pause. He talked about the mill days, the Chevy, our wedding. "Good life, Ellie," he said, squeezing my hand. But as stars pricked the darkening sky, he handed the watch back. "You keep it now, for later." His words hung there, heavy with unspoken farewell. I nodded, throat tight, feeling the metal warm from his touch. That was when the tension crested, the understanding that we were nearing the end, and all I could do was cherish these fragments.
Winter came hard that year, snow blanketing the yard in thick layers, muffling the world outside. Tom's health declined. A cold turned to pneumonia, landing him in the hospital with its beeping monitors and antiseptic halls. I'd drive there daily, slush splashing under the tires, sitting by his bed with a magazine I barely read. The watch stayed in my coat pocket, a comforting weight. "Remember the park?" I'd whisper, holding his hand, veins blue under thin skin. Sometimes a flicker of recognition, other times nothing. The kids rotated shifts, Sarah with coffee runs, Mike pacing the waiting room. We knew, though. One March morning, as weak sunlight filtered through the blinds and birds chirped tentatively outside, he passed. Peaceful, his breathing just fading away. I was there, stroking his hair, murmuring it was okay to go. The room echoed after. Nurses' footsteps soft in the hall, forms to sign on a clipboard. Home felt hollow without him. The chair by the window still bore his imprint, the coffee maker unused. I went through his belongings gradually, shirts to charity, tools Mike took for his garage. But the watch, I boxed it, pushed it deep into the closet amid old coats and forgotten holiday decorations. Tried to move forward, joined a knitting group at the community center, where needles clicked over tea and chatter, walked the neighborhood, leaves rustling in spring breezes. But grief has its own pace. Nights I'd lie awake, the clock ticking on the wall. Ironic that, regretting the unsaid, why hadn't I pushed for that trip, told him more often how much he meant? Another turning point came months later, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows. I pulled out the box, held the watch under the lamp's glow, and cried. Really let it out. It wasn't just loss, it was acceptance, the pain softening into something bearable. Years have passed now, 5 to be exact. The house is still mine, though quieter. Grandkids visit, leaving fingerprints on the glass doors and toys under the couch. Sarah's family comes for holidays, the table groaning with turkey and pies. Mike calls weekly, sharing stories from his shop. I've traveled a bit, saw the ocean last year, waves crashing on the shore like I'd imagined. And the watch? It's on the dresser now, visible each morning as I straighten the bedspread. I don't wind it anymore, but it reminds me. Time marches on, but so do we. Holding on to it isn't clinging, it's honoring. The gentle truth, I suppose, is that some objects carry echoes of love, helping us navigate the empty spaces. It's okay to feel the tug. It's what keeps the memories alive, weaving them into who we are. Life's not about throwing away the past. It's about carrying it lightly,
letting it guide the way forward.